Good afternoon. This is Professor David Weiss from New Jersey City University, and the ongoing series of podcasts that are also live with guests joining us from around the state today. Our focus is again our ongoing Connecting Bridges and Borders program to connect and build bridges to promote our business community, our educators, and our students, both here and abroad. Our topic today is speaking specifically about what is happening in Trenton and in the state of New Jersey as it relates to the economic stimulus package and how it affects small businesses and entrepreneurship platforms. And we'll also have a discussion about some of the ongoing new policies that may be coming through the pipeline. And then we'll be also having an opportunity for some questions and answers. Before we start, Anthony Russo is the Executive Director of the Commerce Industry Association of New Jersey. He is my guest speaker today. He leads one of the top and probably most important chambers in our state, advocating strongly for many members, over 900 strong, and includes some of the top name companies in our state, CEOs of our strongest, really our strongest companies for GDP growth, as well as every sector represented from law to healthcare, hospitals, airline industries, ports, and the list goes on. And is a strong stakeholder currently in Trenton, helping advise and advocate on behalf of small businesses and entrepreneurs and startups and the wider business community as a whole. Good afternoon, Anthony. How are you?
Good, David. Thanks for having me today, and good afternoon, everyone.
And I also have a special guest with us joining us, Dr. Sue Henderson, the president of New Jersey City University, my boss, and the leadership behind the innovation of many projects that we have at our university, one of them being 6 years going strong, the Institute for Dispute Resolution, and this Connecting Bridges and Borders program. Dr. Henderson, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's actually a lovely day today, and my campus is on the move. In spite of this.
Wonderful. And how are things going on the campus in terms of from higher education and some of the things that you may want to sort of highlight? And I know you have a question for Mr. Russo before we begin our formal podcast at 3 o'clock, because I know you have some pressing matters. So we wanted to be able to, one, be honored with your coming on this afternoon, and we greatly appreciate it. And I know you had some things you wanted to ask Anthony Russo to consider as he's delivering messages and frankly, working hard and fighting for us down at the Capitol.
So one of the things that I would be very interested in learning is how is it that Trenton and CIANJ are helping these small businesses and entrepreneurs? And let me explain to you why that's really important to an institution like NJCU. Our students come from modest means, and many of their parents or they themselves run small businesses. And as you know, with this virus coming along, those have been the businesses that have been the heaviest hit. We have been following carefully what the federal stimulus package is going to provide. In terms of higher education, here's how it works. If you have a student who needs help with technology, needs help with babysitting, needs help with any kind of support structure around continuing their education in the face of all of this, that's where we'll be able to use some of the federal stimulus money that's allocated to higher education. I didn't really see in the federal stimulus package, money did go to the state, a lot. I didn't see specifically how each state was supposed to use it. So my question as a president who educates students whose parents, or they themselves, come from many small businesses, how do I make sure that they're going to be taken care of so that they can come back to school and finish their degrees?
Excellent question, Anthony.
Yeah, that's a great question, Dr. Henderson. And, you know, this is a very fluid situation. Obviously, the CARES Act was signed on Friday. Mm-hmm. I could tell you the last 2 weeks for a group like our members has just been surreal. To your point, I think a lot of the small businesses need, and the one thing I kept hearing over and over again the last 2 weeks is we need cash in our hands to keep our businesses open. Mm-hmm. So our message to the Trenton lawmakers and to the governor's office was basically, how do you get cash in to people's hands now? How do you help those small businesses? And the CARES Act aside, you know, the state just rolled out some programs through the Economic Development Authority. We actually have a call with Tim Sullivan. We joined forces with the other business groups. And I invite everybody on this call. I could send you the call-in information, but he's going to talk through all 4 programs or 4 or 5 programs that NJEDA is going to put on starting at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Very interesting. A lot of them are loans, but there is some grant money. But we think they need to do more, quite frankly. Also, the Senate President and the Speaker Coughlin, there's probably going to be some emergency legislation going through. The one good thing, and I invite the colleges to join us, is all the business groups have coalesced around what's going on. And this afternoon, we're going to finalize a letter that we're going to send in to both the governor and to the legislature, asking for a lot of these relief packages. But to filter it down to your point, if we don't get cash in people's hands within a week, we're not talking 3 weeks, a month. We're talking it's got to happen now. I've talked to a lot of our businesses that, quite frankly, have shut down, and they've laid off employees. So, and that's really the goal, and what we're hoping for is that, everybody talks about the surplus, and the governor should be credited with the fact that I think he's put over $1 billion in both our surplus fund and our rainy day fund. Well, it's raining outside, and now's the time to actually start spending that money. And we haven't seen that, because one of the things that we noticed with the EDA program is it's in its totality, I think it's around 40 or $50 million. That's not a lot of money. And when you think about the hundreds, thousands of businesses that have been impacted, I keep hearing it all the time. Cash flow has dried up, not because of the virus itself, but because businesses watched what happened with the stock market. People are now working virtually and working from home. People are canceling lunches, breakfasts. You can't even meet one-on-one anymore. Right. I mean, people have completely shut down. They're doing things like we're doing today. And it really has put a halt to business in general. And our message to the governor is to help those small businesses and to help get your students back. There's got to be some optimism here. I mean, we all look about flattening the curve. But at what point is, and a lot of business owners told me, what scares them the most is that there's no end, right? There's no bottom to this. If we could say it's going to be another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you watch the news, you watch what's going on, and people say it could be 3 months, 4 months. Some people say it could be less. Nobody really knows. And there's one thing that businesses don't like, it's uncertainty. So what we're trying to do is, again, trying to shake the tree down in Trenton to get more money into the hands of people quickly, not through loans. As one businesswoman told me, Tony, it's great that they're going to give me a loan, but I can't generate revenue. Right. And if I don't generate revenue, that loan doesn't mean much to me. So I think that's the message that we all need to deliver to Trenton.
I'd also point out that NJCU, like a number of higher education school systems, are members of CIANJ. Is that correct, Tony?
Yeah, we're happy to say we have about 20 colleges and universities as members. So
and let me share one more question, because I'm thrilled that you're going to Trenton and trying to get some support from them. One of the things that did happen to the public institutions is that they've withheld some of our allocation for the rest of the year, which to have somebody tell you 3 months left in the year that they're not going to give you but half of what you need, when what you have left is you've basically spent all your non-personnel money, all you've got less are personnel costs. That's really putting a strain on our institutions as well. So one of the things that would help bolster us up is to know that students are interested in coming to school, and are interested in improving their education. And that can only happen when they have the means to do it. As one of my vice presidents said today, when you have a choice of either going to work or taking out a loan to go to school, you'll just go to work. So we really need to be focusing on their capacity to be able to get back into the economy so that they can come back and get a good education.
So it sounds like you were part of that, I guess, the news that broke last week with Treasury, where they diverted $1 billion. Right. And that goes to, they had to meet some statutory deadlines or mandates. Right. So I didn't realize that. So that's the first time I'm hearing it. It actually impacted our colleges. The unfortunate thing is, if you talk to folks down in Treasury or look at the reports, they're saying that it's probably going to get worse the next 2 or 3 months. What's interesting to me is I've seen no talks about the state budget, but I know the governor did double down on the millionaire's tax. They're still going to go forward with it, but I think it's unprecedented because, and you probably know this, you can't even go to the State House now. It's all done virtually.
Yes.
And so when the legislature comes back, the big unknown right now is, how are they going to handle the state budget? What's going to happen with that money that's been diverted? Are they going to?
And if you remember, their state budget is based on tax revenues, which come from your businesses. So it's a very, very cyclical thing, but we need to get the businesses going again. So,
But you know what I got to say, Dr. Henderson, there hasn't been much talk tapping into those two funds, the surplus fund and the rainy day fund. And again, if you heard the governor during his budget address, and again, he deserves the credit. He put the money in there,
right?
And that's $1 billion.
Right.
We're not seeing that mentioned. I mean, now again, it's raining outside, so let's start spending the money.
Yeah. So maybe one of the takeaways from the conversation both of you are having right now is using the platform of CIANJ and members like NJCU to sort of highlight and remind the governor and others that rainy day fund, that surplus fund, and that rainy day fund are available and should be released sooner than later, because there's obviously, once it's released, there's a whole planning process that needs to take place for universities like NJCU and others. So to do something faster rather than wait till, whenever the budget gets negotiated, which could be through the summer or even to September, maybe that's a takeaway point from this conversation that should be considered.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that small businesses need it now. They are the ones that are the most vulnerable, and they're the ones that will go away the fastest. And where I live, I have a deli. I go every day to just buy something because they need the revenue. They absolutely need the revenue. It's just really important that we keep the economy going.
Yeah, and the analogy I'll use, it's like a snowball rolling downhill. The longer we wait, the worse it gets.
Yep.
And some of these businesses may not come back.
Yep.
So I mean, I don't want to say that there isn't an appreciation in Trenton for that, but they're completely overwhelmed with what's going on. And again, I'm not trying to be disparaging. I just think that there's so much going on right now. And keep in mind too, that a lot of people didn't appreciate, but when the governor ordered all the state workers to work from home, I've been talking to certain agencies and a lot of them weren't prepared to work from home.
No.
And so they have to get that fixed, right? So this is only week 2. And, how do you get to a point? I was talking to one assistant commissioner and he was saying that he spent the last 2 weeks just trying to figure out if they have enough licenses for computers, if people even have the ability to VPN in. These are basic things that we as business people probably have done before, but the state, I don't think, went through something like this where they literally had to exercise, well, how do we work from home? How do we get the job done? And they're trying, and I want to give them credit, but I'm hoping that, as the days go on, and some of the things, and again, for example, we have Tim Sullivan tomorrow for a webinar. We have Robert Asaro-Angelo, who's the Commissioner of Labor, on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. They're all taking time out of their day to try to get us answers to these important questions. But what we can't forget here, it's not just the governor's office. We got to get the state legislature involved, and it's got to be Steve Sweeney, and it's got to be Craig Coughlin.
Yeah, and my hope is that they are strategic about how to revitalize some of these businesses. If you think about the fact that they may close the boardwalks this week, we'll think about all the businesses that were even just doing takeout, how they will be affected, and it'll affect all of us. I know here in Jersey City that a lot of things have had to close down because they are the kinds of businesses that just are only there because the PATH train runs a lot. Well, it doesn't run as much because there's not the ridership, and there shouldn't be. So there's so many businesses that are being affected, and like I said, it has a downstream effect on higher education. One good thing, we have discovered that we have a number of students who don't have either a computer at home or internet. And I will say that the internet companies have been very willing to give free internet access, which is great. The other thing is we've been able to work with a number of vendors who obviously are doing well because they're giving us refurbished laptops to give out to our students. So that's helping them to get connected. So there's an upside to it there.
So Dr. Henderson, before I know you have to go on to some other matters, is there any other because we have a number of stakeholders on today, just to send a message. Are there any other resources like refurbished laptops, donations for internet providing? Is there something else? I mean, I'm sure the list could be a long list, but is there some pressing one that comes to your mind now that we could possibly also just get the word out that our school could certainly use the assistance from the private marketplace? Because there are a lot of stakeholders wanting to try to do something. They're just not sure what they can provide.
I'll share a quick story with you. The complex I live in, the chair of our psychology department is there. And I asked him, he lives there, so I saw him, we were both walking. And one of the things he said is so many of the students are really stressed out right now and are just, to be able to have someone to talk to, a counselor or something. And I don't know if there were people in that industry that would be willing to work with students, because certainly I don't think any institution in the state has the capacity to deal with the fact that your whole student body is dealing with a very stressful situation. So that might be an example of an industry. Certainly the technology we definitely need. I wish I could give 1,000 hotspots out, but we'll do the internet the other way. The laptops, I would say that the vendors that we've worked with have been very, very helpful, and I'm grateful for that. NJ has been very helpful in helping make that happen for us.
Well, that's excellent. And you know what? Those are two great takeaways. Tony, maybe some of your members, when you talk about hotspots and some of these other things, certainly if they're thinking about how to help, here's some takeaways from that conversation. Dr. Henderson, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue our podcast with a lot of people who have now joined for the 3 o'clock session, and let them also have a Q&A opportunity as well.
Thank you. I wish I could.
Dr. Henderson.
So for those that have recently joined the podcast, we are with Tony Russo, who is the Executive Director of the Commerce Industry Association of New Jersey. He'll tell a little bit about what CIANJ is. A number of you are either members or may be aware of it. And this, again, is an ongoing series of podcasts that we are doing live in large forum discussions through the Institute of Dispute Resolution's flagship program, Connecting Bridges and Borders. Tony, why don't you start off just for a minute for those that are on, that may and those that will hear this podcast, which will be released tomorrow worldwide through a lot of our partners and channels, which is into the 10,000 plus. Tell us a little bit about CIANJ and its work, its good work it's doing and what you're doing. And then maybe we can pivot into some of these more granular discussions that a lot of people are interested in, specifically about the grants that the EDA is offering, the Weiss app, which I personally tried and experimented with myself this weekend to test it out, and how the loan process is working. And then we'll have a separate conversation towards the close of the interview on what policies are coming through the pipeline, but also then giving our audience a chance to opine and chime in on some things that maybe are good legislators that are really working, very diligently and trying their best under very dire circumstances, that where they may have good intent on a piece of policy, but because they may not know all the nuances involved in the day-to-day practice, it's getting left sort of not intentionally, but it's just getting left not thought about.
Great. Well, again, David, thank you for the invitation, and hello, everybody. The Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey has been around since 1927. I just celebrated my 7th year there, my 4th year as president. We represent about 900 companies. And what I really like is that we have virtually every business sector covered. And we're a very diverse group. We have a staff of about 11. We print Commerce Magazine every month. We're an advocacy group. We're in Trenton. We have an office in Trenton, an office in Rochelle Park. And really what makes us different than some of the other chambers of commerce and, the Business and Industry Association, we're very strong advocates for a free market economy. And we kind of wish that, these government mandates that have come out over the past few years, really have impacted our membership. So we're advocates. We like to connect businesses. Proud of the fact that NJCU is a member, and we have other members as well. And I see Carithia Oates is on from Morgan Stanley. She's a member. Jennifer is a member. And I know Mike Krieger, Dunn Lambert, his managing partner, Rich Lambert, is a board member. So basically that's our job, is just to try to stay in front of what's going on in Trenton and trying to push information out. The last 2 weeks, I could tell you, David, it's one of those where it's been surreal. If I could describe to you, again, we have 900 members. I like to call them 900 clients. And I've heard from so many that I haven't talked to in years because they're all very, very nervous. They're not sure what's going to happen, and they're hungry for information, and they want that information filtered in a way that I like to use the analogy is the view worth the climb, right? We're going to talk about these programs and grants and loans. Are they going to be easy to get? Or is it going to give them that boost or that kickstart that they need? And that's yet to be determined, right? I think all these applications are going on now, but and I keep telling our members, this is so fluid right now that things could change, right? Now, I'll give you an example. Before they passed the CARES Act, I was on the phone with the Small Business Assistance group, and this is when they had the EIDL program, which is the economic injury designation, because that was the only thing New Jersey was I guess, declared an emergency for, was this thing called EIDL that you put on the application. Well, the SBA spokesperson said to me that a lot of businesses actually inadvertently filled out the applications wrong, and they got irate and went back. And I said, well, what should we do? And he says, well, hold off, because with this federal stimulus package coming out of Washington, a lot of these programs are going to change. And that's exactly what happened. And just to give you a couple of stats on this CARES Act, the thing that people don't appreciate when you think about $2.2 trillion, 350 billion is going to basically be set aside for loans for small business. How do you administer that? Think about the size and scope of that. So I'm proud to say that a lot of our bank members have been asked to be partners, and they're going to administer those loans. So a lot of people are going to go ahead through the process, but they're probably going to deal with their bankers on these applications, which will make the process a lot faster and quicker. I think the president, to his credit, and the treasurer, Steve Mnuchin, I think they understand the need to get the money fast to the people, because if they don't get it fast to the folks, it's really not going to make a world of difference. And, when you look at some of these programs, they're going to cover the basic things like payroll, operating expenses, rent. We also represent developers and landlords. A lot of these landlords are afraid that their leases are going to be probably renegotiated, right? I mean, they're going to come back and say, we can't pay rent. I can't tell you how many restaurant owners I've talked to in the last 2 weeks, that said that they had to lay off hundreds, if not thousands, of their employees. And quite frankly, they're going to not pay their bank loans because they're not in operation. I mean, it's that fundamental. And I think the folks down in Trenton need to appreciate that. As one person said to me, it's great that the governor imposed these. It's everybody's health and safety is number one. But what we should be talking about now is how do we plan for that time when normal comes back, right? Is it going to be a month or two? Now's the time to say, is it going to be a phase-in, a rollout? Is it going to be immediate? Nobody really knows. Right. And I think that's what's the dynamic right now in Trenton, is how do we figure out, is this going to be a cliff at the end and we fall back into line? I don't know. I've talked to a lot of our members that think the world's going to change and that people just won't act the same way. And if you know anything about CIANJ, a big component of our value is putting on events, and that's in-person events, not these virtual events. And so a lot of uncertainty out there, and I'm hoping that the quicker we can get back to normal, the better. But a lot of things.
And you raised some great points in your remarks. I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, as you've been speaking, it's sort of a culmination of the 1986 crisis that led to the Resolution Trust Corporation and a lot of workouts that took place between owners and operators and their creditors, and then it's a combination of the 9/11 episode, a combination of Hurricane Sandy, and a combination of the credit crisis. And now we have this pandemic, which sort of envelopes all of it, yeah? And so maybe part of this conversation that the legislators and other policy makers in our state need to think about is taking some of the programs that worked best in each of those events and perhaps looking at some of those models as channels in order to facilitate what we'll call the blockage, right, that we currently are facing, but could face for months to come, and certainly for years that will have to be untangled, as you say, through a lot of the conflicts that will inevitably take place. What I'd like to focus on for a second, because I don't think a lot of people understand the difference between the grants that are being offered, which are as a very small part of the pie. By the way, for those who are interested, if you Google NJEDA grants, you will be able to go, you'll be defaulted right away to their website. They have what's called a Whiz, like a wizard app, which will then allow you to basically over a set of about 8 minutes or 9 minutes, tell you what you most likely qualify between the grants and the various loans, both federal and state and private. And it sort of pops out in real time. I actually did it this morning to test it out to see how it worked. But so the first part of the question, Tony, is one of the things I noticed about the process and then reading each of the conditions is there's some confusion either in the express language of the grant or the lack thereof. So one, for example, that everyone's very concerned about is that if you're a professional and have a law office, for example, or an accounting office, it doesn't appear that you're excluded, but it also doesn't appear that you're, clearly that you're included. It also seems to be very clear that if you are working from your home office, which a lot of professionals in the state do, they have in fact, they have a home office, they even have a separate location to their physical house, whether it's psychologists, lawyers, accountants, they appear to be fully excluded from that grant. And the third one that is everyone's asking is what we call the 1099 independent contractor, which affects a huge swath of individuals from not just the law and accounting sector, but the real estate sector, the financial advisor sector, the travel agency sector, and the list goes on. What discussions are taking place in Trenton to try to mitigate some of those concerns?
So I'll start with everybody wants a grant. What's the difference? A grant's basically, if I could be candid, it's free money. That's not money that they have to pay back. So the one program that the EDA released was something called the Small Business Emergency Assistance Grant Program. Well, that's only $5 million. And do the math, that $5 million when all you can get as an applicant is a max of $5,000. So you cap out at $5,000. It's not going to go a long way. That's 1,000 applicants. I think Tim Sullivan, even in today's call with the governor's office, he acknowledged that that's probably going to go really fast. So the other programs are loans, micro loans, micro business loans. What are they doing? I'm hoping, David, that they actually reconsider and free up additional monies, more in terms of grants, or make them forgivable loans if they retain their employees. Right. That's the reason why they exist, by the way, is right off the bat, we heard as a business group, when we saw this tsunami coming, right, everybody was saying, here's the tsunami, it's on the way. What's higher ground, right? Social distancing. Well, for companies that can work virtually, that was great, but a lot of these companies can't, and they had to unfortunately let their employees go. And the state kept saying to us, tell your members to hold on. Tell your members to keep those employees on as long as they can. And what was sad is that they obviously couldn't when the governor issued his executive orders and shut a lot of these businesses down. So the give and take is they want the employer to keep those employees on. And the only way to do that is they get cash in their hand. And loans are good, especially if they're low interest, and a lot of them are, but grants will go a lot further. So at this point, though, David, I can tell you that they're unfortunately the programs that are rolled out outside of that first one, the majority of them are all loans. Now,
and that's a great segue to talk about the loans, because I agree the grant program seems to be something that's really a stopgap for a very specific type of sector of business. So I think the message out there needs to be maybe hopefully a little clearer that most of us who thought we could get that $5,000 or $3,000 grant really doesn't apply. But when we look at the loans, the one that I popped up in the 5 categories that come up, really starting at the most preferred loan, if you will, is one through the federal government through, I think, this $2 trillion package, which is up to $100,000. And I think it even goes further beyond that 100,000, but it's a zero interest loan for 10 years. However, when you start to look at the conditions of the loan, even in that preferred loan that I think makes a lot of sense for a lot of businesses, if you look at what most people are expecting or were thinking they would have access to, it starts to really get very granular, almost if you were going down to which they show on the EDA website, the private loan on balance sheet of a bank. They're looking for tax returns. A lot of people are not going to be able to file their tax returns right now. Most people, I think, are going to be on extension. They're looking for credit scores. Frankly, I think all of our credit scores are probably down 20 points. They're looking for a lot of things in that first loan, which I think is the most important, that the government of the United States has given to the states in its allocation or apportionment, as having much more flexibility in its underwriting criteria in order for us to actually get to that loan. Otherwise, the way it's written, it's almost like pre-pandemic, you're walking into the traditional SBA sort of process where they're doing a full examination with personal guarantees. Yeah, the end result is you'll get a very low interest loan. In this case, they're offering 0%. But in my mind, the way I read this, it's like I'm showing you the candy, but 99.9% of us won't even be able to touch the bowl the candy is in.
And that's
So it's a little smoke and mirror, which means how do we sort of handle this issue?
Well, that's a good question, right? I mean, if you look at what came out at the federal level, again, the 350 billion aside, and let me read you the name of the loan programs. There's something called the Paycheck Protection Program loan. There's something called the Small Business Debt Relief Program. Then there's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and then the Emergency Economic Injury Grant. So these are the various programs under CARES that people could apply for. And again, most of them are loan programs. But the key is that if you keep your employees and you hit certain milestones, they'll be able to forgive that loan. So in essence, they become a grant, but they want you to be sustainable and they want to see growth. So I'm hoping that people apply. I could tell you that SBA will probably be overwhelmed. The kicker is, and a lot of people don't realize this, in addition to that 350 billion, I was on a call on Friday. Somebody down in DC was explaining the CARES Act, and they said that every state's going to get a certain amount of money, and that New Jersey was identified about 3.5 billion. And then the question came up, well, how are they going to spend that 3.5 billion? And there wasn't much, it wasn't really prescriptive as to how New Jersey could spend that money. And I think in terms of what we can do, we really need to stay close to the governor when he does get that 3.5 billion. Because again, remember, the 350 billion is separate. Then there's 500 billion that went to distressed economic sectors like the cruise industry, hotels, airlines. And then there are things built in there for employers and employees. I'll give you a couple of good things. And I was talking to one of our accountants today. Just there's a provision in the CARES Act that allows businesses to write off their net operating losses. And that could bring companies hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that particular provision? Because that could be very valuable. Is that a federal net operating loss, or is that a state?
That's at the federal level.
Really?
Yeah.
So is it a dollar for dollar, or is it a ratio? And is that a transfer? So because I actually worked on the New Jersey tax transfer law many years ago to help promote biotech and high-tech companies. So I'm a little familiar with how some of these programs work. We had a lot of this pre the 1986 Tax Act, and then a lot of these losses were removed, except for very specific industries like oil and gas, racehorsing, and others, low and moderate income housing, for example. So are we looking at a program that's just a write-off, or is it something that possibly is being considered where you could actually sell those losses and receive some level of cash, which is what we do with our New Jersey tax transfer program?
Yeah, I could tell you that the federal act didn't get into that kind of detail.
Not
It's
yet.
just that you're allowed to go back a few years to look at your NOL and then leverage that.
So it's more of a carry forward accumulation, and then be able to bring it down.
I think so.
So that's good information that perhaps not only is that something that I didn't know myself, that's very, very helpful. but for tax planning purposes and discussions with our tax accountant professionals and our lawyers who do this type of highly specialized work. Is there a possibility for further discussion on that at the state level, where they can expand the existing tax transfer program that already exists, so the platform and infrastructure is there, and somehow utilize that mechanism through the EDA to allow businesses possibly at the state level to do that?
So I think what's happening right now, David, is the Trenton folks are looking at the CARES Act, because there are various provisions in the CARES Act that New Jersey is going to have to pass specific legislation to address, right? So, you know, whether or not they have to amend their own tax statutes, probably something that we're going to see sooner rather than later. You know, the one example is, and not to kind of go off to another direction, but unemployment insurance, right? I mean, if you think about what the Federal CARES Act does, it's going to add a flat $600 a week, $600 a week, right, to anybody that's been displaced. When you combine that with the state's maximum of $630 and change a week, that's $1,200 a week that somebody can collect for 4 months, right? So think about that. That's part. The question though is New Jersey, does New Jersey have to do anything statutorily to allow for that? And I'll give you an example. In the Federal Act, independent contractors and self-employed people can now for the first time apply for unemployment insurance. One of the questions that we'll ask the Commissioner of Labor on Wednesday is whether or not in New Jersey, because right now in New Jersey they were prohibited from doing that, if they could apply for unemployment insurance. So things like that I think what we're going to see is some New Jersey-based legislation that complements the Federal CARES Act, because there are some other things in there. To your point, do they have to amend the tax statutes to look at NOLs, look at business interest loans? The one provision that I really liked in there, and I didn't have an appreciation for it until about a week ago, one member that I was talking to, when I was asking him, are you going to have to lay off your employees? And he says, I don't really want to, but New Jersey should follow, the United States should follow the German model. And what's the German model? And what Germany does in these kind of crises is they work with the employer and say, look, you take a laborer that maybe puts 40 hours a week in. If you're going to have to reduce their hours, keep that employee on, reduce their hours to 20. We'll cover the other 20 on unemployment, and we'll reimburse you. I mean, we'll actually, that employee stays on, they get their medical benefits. And so there's a provision in the CARES Act that actually allows for that. But again, New Jersey has to adopt a law that would allow that to happen. So these are the kind of things that I think we have to be diligent and vigilant on, you know, in the coming weeks to say, let's make sure that we take full advantage of the CARES Act. I talk to some people, David, and they say, it's great, 2.2 trillion, but I'm not probably going to see much, right? Whether it's these loans or anything like that, they're capped at 100,000, like you said. A lot of them have provisions like you have to make a certain amount of revenue or less. So I think it's going to keep a lot of accountants busy over the next 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to keep a lot of lawyers busy. I know our business owners, they just really want to know what should I do? Where should I apply? It'll probably take 2 or 3 weeks to find out an answer. And hopefully by then we would have flattened the curve and maybe get back to business. But I don't know. But we'll stay on the New Jersey lawmakers to make sure that they pass a lot of laws that take advantage of what's in CARES.
So I'm going to ask 2 more questions. As I'm doing so, please feel free. We're going to open up where you can type in your questions. It'll pop up on my screen, and I'll select a few for Tony to be able to answer from those that have joined us this afternoon for this podcast session for Connecting Bridges and Borders at New Jersey City University. Tony, my last 2 questions that I have, that one is specific to the loans that are in front of you. There's a provision about entrepreneurship or startup platforms. A lot of this is about the gig economy. Are there any more discussions, or is there any more clarity? Because that particular provision was I was excited to see it, but then when you read it, it didn't seem again to really connect the dots of how it's going to be administered. So that's question 1. And the second, which you raised earlier, which was really interesting, is which I fully agree, and I thought that I've had multiple conversations on this, is that the banks were going to administer this process because it seems efficient that they would. Are there any banks that publicly that you're able to talk about so that people know already which ones may perhaps already be in the game and are willing to sort of let people know which ones they can go to already to assist them? And then the third and last question, which is more of an open-ended question while people are asking questions onto the to our Zoom, is on a broader scale, what other interesting policies either that CIANJ is advocating for, or you're seeing discussed in preliminary discussions that we should be aware of in a positive way in terms of things that are working in trend, or things that perhaps CIANJ is concerned about and we should also be aware of?
So I'll start with, the banks that are going to probably work with the authorities. If you go on the NJEDA website, their banking partners are the large banks like you would expect, the TD banks, the M&Ts, Lakeland, some regional banks. So there's a bunch. And so the good news is I think that's a smart thing that they did, is a partner with banks so they don't have to use up their resources. And so I think that's going to go on. In terms of other things, this afternoon at 4 o'clock, I think I mentioned earlier that we've joined a coalition of other business groups to ask for a lot of immediate relief. We're looking for tax holidays, whether it's payroll taxes, property taxes, right? They're going to come due May 1st. The quarterly taxes. So, and then a big one that a lot of people don't talk about is if in the midst of all of this, there are still a lot of regulatory and statutory deadlines that companies have to comply with, whether it's environmental, construction. And so we've asked for a 90-day extension until the crisis is over, so businesses can focus on the crisis, focus on getting cash flow up, and that they don't have to spend money to send in a report or to renew a permit. So we're asking for permit extensions. We're asking for extensions to deadlines. We're asking for tax holidays. We're asking that New Jersey pass legislation to extend the tax deadline to July 15th, like the federal government. So it's things like that. It's a laundry list that once the letter goes final, we'll send it out to members. And a lot of the folks on the phone will actually see what we're advocating for. Whether or not we're successful, I guess time will tell.
And then the other third one that I'd asked is on the entrepreneurship. There's some loan money for entrepreneurs and those with startups.
On the New Jersey side.
Right, on the New Jersey side. It's listed there.
And I'm not, I was kind of surprised, David, to see that. I think it's a loan program, and it's about $5 million, and it's geared to entrepreneurs that want to start a business. So,
right, or maintain the business they may have started. Yeah. So there are a number. It's part of the gig economy as well. Here is in our state, as you know, we have a robust innovation, entrepreneurship, startup ecosystem. So it'd be great if there's continued conversations how universities and their strategic partners that are working with accelerators, incubators, small startup companies can access this money with the banks with an easier process that's not overburdensome, because in most cases they're small, they're nimble, they're not resource heavy to be able to go through 50 pages of documents for them to get $5,000 or $10,000, which may be all they need to sustain themselves for a couple months to ride the storm, if you will.
Look, David, I hope if you could join our webinar tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we could ask Tim Sullivan specific to that New Jersey Entrepreneurs Program.
That would be great.
I don't have a lot of information.
No, that's fantastic. And finally, I'm going to start opening up to questions for a few minutes as we wind down our podcast. For those that came on today that may have some interesting questions or observations as well. Given the fact that we do run the Institute for Dispute Resolution, Tony, and we talk about it a lot about the word mediation, which is not, it's a business tool to help businesses work out their disputes with a trained third-party neutral. which means that it's not, the mediator doesn't make a decision. The parties, with the help of the well-trained neutral, will assist them in trying to work out a lot of these complex issues. Now that we have this tsunami event taking place, if you will, economically, as you pointed out in a lot of your important remarks, there's going to be a lot of conflict. It's already started. And one of the things that we believe within the mediation community and generally within the dispute resolution community is, if you incorporate that tool now, that will help save and stimulate the economy, because you're cutting off as many of those disputes early on, rather than the disputants spending a lot of time and resources, and in some cases not operating, right, for many months to come, which ultimately will have an overall impact, especially now that we're in a large mass situation on the GDP growth. So on one end, while you're writing checks, that may be great, but while that same pool is all fighting with all different stakeholders, they still may not be open. Like you made the comment about a restaurant that is, getting a check, but that check may be enough to get it open and get the employees back and even get the customers to come in. But because their landlord is, coming down on them, because of course the landlord's creditors are coming down on the landlord, and all these sort of domino effects, having sort of an implementation of a tool now through chambers of commerce like yours, where we can add a value in even training members of CIANJ with our ADR community, which was one of the leading communities in the country, second to really, I believe, California, historically, when dispute resolution began. And this is stuff we can do now, especially with the courts closed. And there may be a period of time that even when the courts open, they're going to be so overburdened that the ability to have access to justice, may go on beyond the 2-year calendar call. And so even though the courts have a rule, it's called Rule 140 program, meaning that you'll get an assigned professional qualified mediator. In fact, Bob Margulies, who's on this Zoom program today, is one of the granddads of designing this program with our esteemed justices and judges in the past throughout the entire court system, and works diligently every day, even right now, on this. But the problem is that is going into the court system first. So the question is, how can we work with chambers and their members clients and those customers and others at the ground level, so we never even have to get to the court process, because of course that then is going to be more burden on both the taxpayer and even access to justice for those with the conflicts, and stymies economic growth while that's all happening, and spending more resources by both the plaintiffs and the defendants in all of these matters.
Well, I think, hopefully, David, I think the way to do that is to hold an event, whether virtual or real time, where our members can learn about the mediation process and just promoting it, really. It's just
one of the things that I'm going to advocate on our side is maybe the Economic Development Authority, the Office of the Governor, the SBA, as part of some of the money they're getting from Washington, is not just earmarked to write checks. As you pointed out, it's apportionate to invest back in getting the economy going.
Right.
Maybe there's an ability of having a dialogue on some grant money for universities like ours with robust dispute resolution programs, like ours is going on 6 years, that can assist in that process right now. We don't have to wait 3 months, 6 months down the road, and we can start assisting these stakeholders as they're facing a lot of these dilemmas. And also it reduces even personal pressure, right? If you think about it on the human level, a small business owner is getting hit from every direction, and it also becomes a pressure cooker in their own homes. So other problems are coming out of that as well. So I lay that out there for future discussion, but for something as, one of our leaders in our state advocating for businesses and also for this economic recovery, to consider how mediation can play a role through some of the money to assist in that in real time.
Good point.
On that note, I want to thank you, Tony. I want to open it up for a minute or two to anyone that may have some questions or comments to share. And you can do so. Our producer, Michael Arbit, who's worked really hard on our shows, he's going to allow an opening for you to be able to actually email right at your LinkedIn. You'll see the chat button, and you can actually put a chat in, or will unmute if there's an ask or request to do so. I think Bob Margulies, you're on. You may have a question.
Yes, Anthony, it seems to me that one of the ways that we could be helpful to the business community, we now, really as a result of David's input, are recognizing mediation more as something that has to do not with courts, but with business. And to the extent that even pre-dispute or pre-court, pre-litigation, we have trained people who could be helpful to your members where they have disputes, whether they're with the government, whether they're with each other, whether they're with third parties. I call it a speed bump. The idea you have to have a discussion and it's a monitored, we're sort of the parental control, so it's a sort of monitored. I think we would like to be of help in that regard. So hopefully we can do that.
Yeah, I think David knows, we have a couple of platforms where we could send information about that out, so.
That'd be great. And again, look at it, Tony, as a grassroots process, really that begins at the level of our chambers and our industry groups. Before it gets to a point where they don't have other options. Yeah.
So I have a question. I have a question for you and Bob.
Sure.
If we roll out a program or push information out, and I know you're both attorneys, and I see Jennifer's on, would counsel tell a company to mediate before going to court?
My experience is we've sort of changed the mindset very much in New Jersey. People didn't know anything about mediation, so they were resistant. But that started back 25 years ago now in New Jersey. So I can't tell you how many times people say, it used to be I'd settle a case, negotiate with the adversary. They say, we want to try and settle a case. We need a mediator. Well, okay, I'm a mediator, so that's fine. But the sense of the culture now is to utilize mediation in a big way. So I don't think you'll find the resistance that you've found before.
Oh, sorry. I'd like to also just add that, the mindset has changed. A lot of people who have been through the court system know that New Jersey is a mandatory mediation state. And more as we go around to companies, to courts, and around the world, we find that people are asking for, and we're providing clauses that go into business contracts, any kind of contract between parties that requires mediation before you do anything else. Several years ago with David and Bob and Laura Castor, we have a new law in New Jersey, the New Jersey Arbitration, Mediation, Conciliation Act. We have a program in New Jersey that if you are able to reach an agreement through mediation, it then is entered as an arbitration award. It is enforceable in about 160 countries around the world. So we feel we're also developing the Global Mediation Exchange Center in Jersey City that is exactly geared for small businesses, individuals, international companies, or even local companies to quickly, easily, expeditiously, and also economically, reasonably way to resolve their disputes.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. And just so you know, I want to ask a very important question that came up on the Zoom chat about entrepreneurs. We will be having, for those listening and those after this podcast around the world, we're going to be having an international Zoom webinar where 500 people around the world will participate in a mediation discussion around these issues to help not just our state, but to be a model that can be used around the United States and around the world. The question that I have now asked of me is, as an entrepreneur, does the new stimulus bill help incentivize starting a business, and how? So this is not about businesses that are suffering, but businesses now that want to be created. And I want to start a business, but the discourse has covered how small businesses in Russo stay afloat rather than how new businesses can gain funding. So really the question, Tony, is an interesting one, and that is if the entrepreneurship section of that bill, which may be a discussion that you can't answer today, but could be highlighted in this upcoming webinar that you were referring to a few moments ago, and that is, for the startups in existence, it seems that bill has a provision. Whether or not that bill is a bill that makes the most efficient process, that's one question. But this question is, if I want to start a business right now, which is actually very optimistic, I think in a good way, because it shows there are a number probably of people out there in the state that up until a month ago were about to launch something. So is there a way that perhaps maybe that provision could be expanded to include not just existing, but also future or brand new, or to have some discussion or dialogue with both the EDA, especially I think the EDA and Kathleen Calviello, and the New Jersey Technology Council, if it's a tech-based company, or if it's biotech, bio-related, Debbie Hart, or if it's light manufacturing, there's obviously other provisions within the EDA that help that situation, or just in general idea creation labs. So is there any input or feedback on a personal level as advocating for new business growth that you could suggest from that question?
Yeah, I think there are state programs that help. If you look at this federal stimulus, just let me tell you what CARES stands for, and that should answer the question that it's really not geared to startup businesses. It's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. So relief was the key word there. So they're not looking to, help startup companies. They're really looking to get companies that suffered. But to answer your question, I know that in New Jersey, there's an angel investors tax credit program. There's a micro business loan program. NJEDA actually can probably help start the businesses and provide some funding there.
Okay, great. And I know there's going to be future podcasts, and we will cover this for those that are in the startup space. We also have a project at NJCU under IDR as well that is called the Entrepreneurship Innovation NJCU Jersey City Connect Project. And it's all about connecting ideas across both the university and within Jersey City, and then interconnected through the good hard work that we've been doing with the TIE organization, Rutgers University Business School Lab, as well as NGIT with people like Dr. Suresh Kumar. I've got one more question time frame, and that's going to go to Michael Krieger. Michael, please go ahead and ask your question live.
How you doing, everyone? What I wanted to comment on is a couple of things at this point. Number one, regarding including dispute resolution clauses in contracts. We've been doing that for years, what we call progressive dispute resolution. Basically, we encourage people signing contracts to first talk to each other, and then there's time frames involved, and then the next level would be mediation. And then, not to be quoted, although I guess I am going to be quoted, for years, we have actually found that arbitration, although we do arbitration, sometimes complicates the speed with which and the friction that we're trying to eliminate by using mediation. So in some contracts, we've left that out, and we go directly to court. At this point, my view is, with the courts not being basically accessible, I think, David, and you had an article in the State Bar Association regarding your project in Puerto Rico. And I love the focus on what mediation can do and the use of mediation techniques, not just mediation, but getting mediation back early in the contract process. And now is actually reduces friction. So at this point, what I heard on this call was an enormous amount or enormous potential for unwanted friction in having people to be able to access and use effectively these new programs. And the next thing, so I thought that people might be interested in that in fact, echoing Bob and Jennifer, we have been using in our contracts progressive dispute resolution clauses that include, importantly, first trying to get the parties to negotiate. That is, in a sense, use of mediation technique before you go to formal mediation. Anyhow, my point is, how am I going to work from home for 30 days? Does anybody have an answer to that?
Well, I think, Michael, it's a difficult answer, and there'll be many podcasts. We've already done a number of them talking about these issues because they resonate across all of the subject matters that we are raising, from hospitality to international business to what's happening at the state level, which is today's discussion. And I think, unfortunately, I don't even think Nostradamus would have been able to predict, even though I think he had some good hits and suggestions in what he did back in the dark ages. But I think we have to look at this optimistically and know that, sure, culture will change, but as human beings, we adapt. And as Americans, we have been through much in the history of the United States, and generation to generation, we've each been told that we will persevere. And the most important thing that I believe as Americans we have still is we have our liberty and our opportunities to do what we want to do. I think what's important is that we maintain our liberties and those opportunities, and then we're going to have to adapt to the new reality. Tony, just to complete our podcast, and I want to thank you so much for taking your time during what I'm sure is just an amazingly hectic schedule for you. And as you said, representing 500 clients, plus dealing and interacting with so many stakeholders from Washington to New Jersey on policy. Are there any parting words you can provide for this interview today before we wrap up?
Well, the only thing I would say is that if you never were involved in politics before, get involved, because now it matters. This is how the money is distributed. You need to be heard. You need to become that squeaky wheel, because right now there's a lot of money coming our way, and hopefully it gets to the right people and it helps. So get involved.
Well, thank you, Tony, for your time today from your other headquarters of CIANJ, and keep up the good work, both as director and on what you do on a personal level for I'm sure the sacrifices that you're making for yourself, your friends, your family. I know you're on the road a lot. You should have some casualty pay for being on the battlefield, as they say. But thank you very much for being holding that flag and trying to really help advocate to bring our economy back and to assist our businesses, small and large, navigate these very treacherous waters. On that note, again, another Connecting Borders and Borders series is completed. Look for our podcasts online. They'll go out tomorrow from the ones that we've done today. Until that time, I bid you adieu and safe, good health, and my prayers to, of course, all of your friends, your loved ones, and those that we may not know. Let us keep them in our hearts and our thoughts. Take care now.